Welcome, cursed friends, to 3 stories about your new home. There is nothing sweet about what you're about to find inside your safest space. Our new home was in a nice middle-class neighborhood. Our next-door neighbor on the left was a friendly older man who went by the name of Alfonso. After introducing myself and giving names to my wife and children, I asked Alfonso about the previous owners of my home. "Found interesting things, have you?" Alfonso asked slowly. Smiling, I replied that there was carpet on the kitchen floor and Kentucky Derby-themed wallpaper in the master bedroom. But Alfonso looked disappointed by my answer. He also looked a tad suspicious. "Nothing else has caught your notice?" he pressed. I told him not really. We liked the home despite the strange decorating. It was our first. "And what or who will you be putting in that 4th bedroom?" he asked while watching me closely. Confused, I looked back at my house and saw what I knew to be true. "It's a 3-bedroom, I stated. He nodded, but also seemed to be waiting for something more from me. "Then you haven't seen it," Alfonso muttered. "Maybe that means it's finally gone." He wouldn't elaborate on what he meant and steered the conversation to the topic of schools, which was of interest to me because of my 2 daughters. I soon forgot about the strange comment about a 4th bedroom. But I remembered what Alfonso had said later that night while checking the doors and windows of our new house. As I stood alone in the darkened upstairs hallway, I tried to figure out why Alfonso believed there was a 4th bedroom. He had claimed to live in his own home for over 15 years. So why would he be confused about the layout of this house? I quickly peeked into the bedroom that my twin daughters shared. They were 6, but soon they'd each have their own room. Nothing looked unusual when I looked in on them, so I made my way to the 3rd bedroom and walked inside. We were currently using it for storage until we figured out where we wanted to place our belongings. Boxes and furniture cluttered the center of the room, waiting to be distributed around the house. The walls were covered in wallpaper from floor to ceiling. I ran my palm over the paper. Nothing felt unusual. There weren't any suspicious bumps. Besides, this was the last room at this side of the house. The outer wall of the room was the outer wall of the house. There couldn't be another room attached to it. I turned to leave, but when I reached the door, a gut feeling made me turn my head. I saw the faintest of glowing lines on the outer wall of the bedroom. It was so faint, I was nearly convinced it wasn't real. But I walked back to the wall and touched one of the vertical lines. The light beneath my fingers went out, as though my fingertips blocked the light source from coming into the room. Outside was the night air. There couldn't be a light source there. And why were the lines formed in the shape of a full-sized door? A chill rushed over me. I stepped back, eyes glued to the door-shaped light. I couldn't see a doorknob, but I wasn't sure if that mattered. Disturbed, I hastily pushed a heavy armoire in front of the lighted doorway. The armoire's wooden feet screeched as they slid over the hardwood floor. Fearing it wasn't enough, I shoved the boxes of our unpacked belongings inside the armoire to weigh it down. Then I pushed it to test how heavy it all was. The armoire wouldn't budge. Days passed and my family and I became more comfortable with our new house and neighborhood. The twins enrolled in school, and my wife began making plans for interior decoration. One night, as I was making the rounds of the house, checking doors and windows as usual, I heard a sound which chilled me to the bone. I ran quietly up the stairs and crept along the hallway. Over time, I'd begun to learn the creaks and groans that were specific to our home. This hadn't been one of those sounds. With dread, I pushed open the door to the 3rd bedroom. It was still filled with furniture and household goods, but there was a difference now. The boxes that I'd placed inside the armoire were gone. My wife must have unpacked them. The armoire itself now sat 4 inches away from the wall that I had pushed it against. The screeching of its feet over the floorboards was the sound that I had heard just then. "Daddy?" I spun. My daughter Rania stood just inside the room, sleepily rubbing her eye with one hand. "Daddy, you're not going to the other home, are you?" she asked. "What other home?" I said. "The home where we're all messy and weird." She bit her lip briefly. "You and Mommy and Zoya. There's something wrong with you in the other home." Her voice dropped. "It scares me." My heart thundered. "Rania, where is the other home?" She pointed at the wall behind the armoire. "The door doesn't open far enough." She began to cry. "But the messy you tries to pull me through it." "That's not me, baby," I whispered in horror. "That was never me." I rushed my daughter out of the room. I nailed the door shut that night, and in the morning secured it with every lock imaginable from the home improvement store. The home is now listed for sale at a reduced price. We'll take a huge financial loss on it. But I never wanted a 4-bedroom home in the first place. My new condo was a great deal. Though it was small, it was clean and well cared for. As a bonus, it came with all the appliances, saving me a big chunk of money. The refrigerator by itself was a major score. It was big and shiny, with a water and ice cube dispenser in the door. It looked like a futuristic vault. The old fridge I'd grown up with had been half the size and hadn't made ice cubes. Since this was my first time setting up an adult home for myself, I was determined to make it special. That meant a new sofa, which arrived within a day of my moving in, and a new bed, which wasn't scheduled to be delivered for another week. So I was spending my nights sleeping on the sofa in the living room, with my pet goldfish Buggy for company. It wasn't bad, except for one thing. The refrigerator was incredibly noisy. I expected some noise because of the ice maker, but this went beyond the usual hiss of water and the rumble and clatter of ice falling into the reservoir. And it wasn't the humming and gurgling of the evaporator either, because I was familiar with that noise. This was something different, something incredibly annoying. It sounded as though someone were knocking on the fridge's door from the inside. It wasn't a steady mechanical lock that I could eventually ignore. These knocks came sporadically, sometimes every few seconds, sometimes only a couple of times an hour. Weirdly, the knocks varied in strength, at times sounding demanding like a bossy visitor on the doorstep, or soft and furtive like someone thinking of sneaking into a room. Those sneaky knocks disturbed me the most. There seemed to be intent behind them, almost as though I were being taunted. But that was impossible, so I was filled with confusion. After a week of noise-induced insomnia, I finally padded into the darkened kitchen to confront the fridge. After all, a free one was worthless if it was permanently going to annoy me. I opened the door, expecting the noises to stop. They did stop, but something else happened. Or rather, it didn't happen. The interior light didn't come on. Inside of my dark fridge appeared weirdly deep, vast even, as though if I reached my hand into the darkness, I'd be able to extend it all the way in up to my shoulder. The fridge was normal-sized. It shouldn't have appeared that dark or that deep, yet it did. It was also cold, colder than the freezer compartment. It was a dry, airless freeze, like something you'd find in a black hole at the farthest reaches of space. An alien cold. As I stared into that disturbing darkness, I heard a low, menacing growl. Shocked, I jerked back and slammed the door shut. The fridge gave a single, mocking knock. "Oh, screw you," I muttered, red-faced and annoyed. I kicked the base of the fridge. "What a piece of junk," I told Buggy as I returned to the sofa. No wonder they included it for free. I lay down and told myself to stop being stupid and go to sleep. The fridge seemed to have settled down. Maybe opening the door had changed the air pressure or something. I was willing to believe anything. Anything except that sound, which could not have been a growl. I woke to the sound of urgent knocking and sat up with a gasp. The knocking came again, not from the front door, but from the kitchen. I knew what it must be. With sweating palms, I approached the refrigerator and slowly opened the door. The knocking stopped. The bead Arctic blackness greeted me again. I strained to see the back of the fridge, but it remained in endless darkness. Frustrated, I closed the door and stared at the ice cube dispenser inset in the freezer door. I pushed the lever and listened to the rattle of ice cubes being carried into the chute. A single ice cube tumbled out onto the cup tray. Perfectly preserved in the cube, like a fly in amber, was my goldfish, Buggy. I scrambled out of the kitchen. Grabbing my keys and phone, I ran past Buggy's empty fishbowl and dashed out of my condo, clad in only my socks. I haven't been back since. From my friend's house, I've arranged for a drunk removal specialist to take the fridge to the dump. I have repeatedly warned the business owner to take the fridge straight to the dump and not attempt to resell it, but his assurances sound like lies, and I fear for the worst. I sincerely hope I'm wrong and no one else ends up with that fridge. I shiver to imagine what, or who else, it could freeze. The biggest mistake of my life was buying the house. It had great square footage, and I'd gotten it at an unbeatable price because the bank had foreclosed on the previous owners. But there was a downside to the deal. The house was a 70s throwback, with shag carpeting, sunken living room, terrazzo countertops, and worst of all, an entire wall of the dining room covered with a mosaic mirror. It looked like a once whole sheet of glass had been shattered into hundreds of pieces and glued back to the wall. The effect was unsettling. Maybe the previous owner had set up lighting that created a disco effect in the room. But for me, every time I walked into the room, I was faced with a fragmented, funhouse image of myself, as though I too had been shattered into countless pieces. I called in contractors to quote me on the cost of removing the mirrors, but every one of them told me it would be damaging to the wall. The glass seemed to be embedded in the surface. Removing it might expose asbestos, they warned, or they quoted me outrageous prices. If it wasn't such a wild thought, I would have believed there was a conspiracy among them to prevent me from removing the mirrors. I made plans to attempt it on my own, but would have to wait until my vacation days. Until then, I avoided using the room for dining. Unfortunately, I had to walk through it to reach the kitchen. Each time I did so, I kept my eyes averted to avoid seeing myself. But after several weeks of successfully doing that, I happened to glance up at the mirror one morning after a rough night. What I saw made me stop in my tracks. I'd forgotten how fractured I looked in all the pieces, as though the image of me had exploded. But that wasn't what stopped me from breathing. In the broken image of me, there was a stranger's eye. My eye was blue. The eye looking back at me was brown. I blinked. The eye in the mirror blinked too, just a fraction slower. I hurried away without looking back. I avoided looking into the mirror for another week, afraid of what or who I might find in it. But eventually, curiosity won out. I needed to know if I'd imagined what I'd seen, or if something more had happened. In the safe, cheery light of mid-afternoon, I looked into the mosaic mirror. My image was still splintered, but it was worse than that. The mirrored pieces of my body had been replaced by pieces of a stranger. I could see most of their face, where mine should have been. The man looked angry. When I waved my trembling hand at him, the man in the mirror pieces made a violent punching motion at me. Without thinking, I grabbed one of the dining room chairs that I never used and hurled it at the wall of mirrors. The glass shattered. I threw my hands up to shield myself as everything went black. When I awoke, I found myself staring out at the living room. But this view, this angle, was new to me. It meant I was in the dining room, that I stood at the opposite end of the room as though I had my back against the wall of mirrors. I looked around. To either side of me and behind me was only blackness. But I could hear multiple voices in the darkness, low and dim. I thought I also heard the sound of weeping. I looked back out at the dining room just as a middle-aged man holding a file folder escorted a young couple into the room. The three of them stared straight at me. I called out to them. I tried to step forward, but there was a barrier between us. invisible, impenetrable. When was the last time you saw a wall like that? The middle-aged man said with a chuckle. He waved at my direction. That's a designer showpiece. Looks funky, the young woman said with a grin. Belongs in a groovy bachelor pad. No way we're keeping it. You can always remove it, said the man holding the file. On a foreclosure like this, you can do anything you like for cheap. Except you can't, I tried to yell at them. This house won't let you. They didn't hear me. They didn't see me. But maybe one day they will see my eye or my ear. Maybe one day they'll succeed where I hadn't and destroy this secret prison before it captures anyone else.